Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We're the show that takes complex stuff and, well, tries to make it clear and useful for you. Today, we're jumping into something really fascinating. It's all about how our work lives and personal lives kind of weave together, and also how we figure out what expertise is really worth and how learning is changing, especially now with, AI stepping in. Our material for this deep dive, it's drawn from some really reflective conversations, packed with surprises and actual experiences. Think insights from things titled Bridging Professional and Personal Growth and Reflecting the AI Augmented Learning Journey. So our mission here is to unpack what being future-ready truly means today. We want to get a handle on those small but important shifts in how we learn and see how everything, tangible or not, shapes who we become.
Yeah, it's really quite something, isn't it? How these different threads, like our own experiences, how we work with others, even understanding the bigger systems around us, how they all seem to come together to paint this really whole picture of growth. So this deep dive is a great chance to get past the surface level stuff and really, connect the dots.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's maybe start with the hard numbers, because our sources kick off with a pretty striking example of what top-level insight costs now. We're talking a consultant charging 10,000 euros a day for insights,
Right.
with a final meeting booked in Frankfurt. And that's way up from previous McKinsey partners mentioned, who were maybe 6,000 euros, then apparently dropped to 2,000. Though for two people, that still adds up to 4,000 euros. So what's driving this big jump in perceived value?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, companies paying these kinds of rates, they're not just buying like practical work output, they're buying responsibility, a huge amount of it. They're paying for someone to predict the future, essentially, in a way that goes way beyond just crunching old numbers. And crucially, it's about being able to translate fuzzy things like, say, social impact into actual commercial results. That's the key. So yeah, it's not just about doing tasks. It's about being genuinely future ready, having that foresight, and maybe just as importantly, having the confidence to command that kind of value, to actually ask for it.
And the lifestyle that sometimes goes with it?
Yeah.
The sources mention things like 100 flights a year, or casually stopping off in London for an afternoon en route to Ibiza to see family. So what does this all mean beyond the money? It kind of shows that the pay packet at that level is really tied to that unique foresight, right? And the weight of responsibility, much more than just the hours you put in.
Exactly. And while it might look like, easy money from the outside, it really represents a situation where it's very clear where their skilled value is. It's recognized. And often, like you said, it comes down to confidence, just taking the confidence to say, okay, I know, believing in your own insight.
Okay, so moving on from value, the sources then dig into the limits of just relying on, big data.
Yeah.
They point out that the current tech stack, all the software and tools we use, and even our experience stack, meaning all that user data, it's all based on what's already happened, history. And here's where it gets really interesting. What do you do when you need to predict what's next?
Right, that's the fundamental problem. Historical data alone, well, it doesn't really help for the future. Not directly. And what's fascinating here is the realization in the sources that something vital is, missing. It's the qualitative part, the why behind the what. Big data can show you broad trends, sure, but often it's too narrow to show you where it hurts. The complex behaviors, the subtle interactions between things, the stuff numbers alone just can't capture.
Yeah, and they give that amazing, almost weird example, don't they? This seemingly random link between how much harmonic greenery is in a neighborhood and the amount of antidepressive people are buying in the pharmacies. I mean, how would you even think to connect those?
It really raises an important question, doesn't it? How do we get beyond just thinking in straight lines?
Yeah.
The sources touch on this idea of AI learning from other AI, finding correlations that we humans couldn't even see because we're not thinking this way. We're too linear, maybe. And that points towards needing, systemic thinking and whole new rules for training AI, maybe. Things like redundancy for safety nets and diversity in data to make AI more resilient, less biased.
Now, shifting gears a bit, this deep dive also uncovers this really interesting tension. It's in the learning journey itself. It's about the line, or maybe the lack of a line, between professional growth and personal growth. Because initially, the reasons for the learning journey described were pretty clear-cut, definite or professional.
But what's fascinating here is how that changed. The journey itself became, as they put it, very interdimensional and very fulfilling on a personal level, even when the professional outcome, like a specific service to sell, wasn't totally clear. It really suggests this blurring of categories, The old labels just didn't quite seem to fit anymore.
Yeah, and they talk about transition being a better word than transformation. I like that. They use that caterpillar metaphor. The old stuff is fading away. You're not quite sure what the new thing is yet. It shows you're in transition. And in that messy middle state, categories like professional or inner development are just not really fitting.
Exactly. And that leans much more towards a kind of sensing aspect, doesn't it? Feeling your way through it rather than having a rigid design aspect. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really challenges that common idea that we can just, sit outside a system and design for change. It's more like it's a call for a bit of humbleness, maybe. Recognizing we're part of the system we're trying to understand or influence.
Right. But even with all that blurring and, well, messiness you described, the sources show that some pretty clear principles did actually emerge from the partnership they described. They call them cognitive markers. Those little moments like, ping, the light goes on.
Yeah.
When something just clicks.
Yes. And these systemic design principles, they seem to be standing the test of time, partly because there was a gap, a break between doing the work and then reflecting on it later. The first big one they label is the conceptual playground, which is kind of an umbrella term for sensing, mapping, and prototyping.
Okay, so the messy note-taking we talked about, that was the sensing part, just gathering everything.
Pretty much. And then the mapping, that involved a systemic use of the AI, like using an LLM to organize and structure all those messy notes.
Yeah.
It was about organizing, storing, and continuously building on the inputs.
Got it. And the prototyping, that was the real-world stuff, like building that course or the work on the Mexican Pavilion, making the learning applicable.
Precisely. Then there's systemic experimentation, which sounds a bit formal, but it's really about constantly questioning and recognizing the process itself, pushing the boundaries. It has that sort of punk vibe, testing the limits to see what happens.
I like that. And the last one, reinforced learning.
Yeah, that's about continuously feeding the insights back into your own system, your own understanding, iterating basically, without needing some grand linear end goal, just learning from the process itself.
Okay, so the partnership they had, it almost became the proof of concept to these ideas.
In a way, yes. They describe it as a kind of cognitive dancing, like two people improvising together, responding, building on each other's moves without a fixed script, a very dynamic interaction.
Okay, let's shift from the abstract principles to something more, well, physical experiences, where we are, what we do. It actually shapes how we think and learn. The sources mention specific moments where you can almost feel the learning happening, where flow states occur.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is just how much impact these physical settings and shared experiences can have. They really stick with you. They're not just, nice memories. They seem to become part of the understanding itself, foundational.
Yeah, the examples are really vivid. That dinner mentioned, Wasabi Blue in Palma de Mallorca, described as having so much energy, so much flow. You can almost picture it. But then there's that bike ride. In a thunderstorm in Mallorca. Yeah. And what's interesting isn't just, we got wet. It's how facing that risk, that discomfort together, apparently built this deep collective trust. Like the physical challenge mirrored the collaboration needed for their work. And then there was the Arient experience up on the mountain. Disconnection, but also this intense physical energetic connection. Plus the Monviso trip, the Biennale in Venice, lots of different places.
And this raises that really interesting question about the energy of the whole place, doesn't it? Its influence. Does a place like Venice, with all its liveness, attract certain people? Or does it actually change the people who go there? And they contrast that with Monviso, which felt heavy, hard, cold, and how that different energy seemed to fit different personalities or aspects of the work. It really underlines this idea of place influences, how where we are affects who we are and how we interact.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about AI. Because the sources dives into how AI was integrated into this journey. And the approach sounds really interesting. It wasn't just, using AI like Google Search 2.0. It was positioned more as a tool, an enhancer, a collaborator almost.
Right. The process involved literally taking what the AI, specifically an LLM, spat out, as they put it, and then really reflecting on that output, thinking about it. And that process helped bring things to the surface that maybe they'd have just taken for granted otherwise. Like, for instance, noticing the shift in the learning journey itself from being about a single person to being about a couple working together. So in that sense, the AI was helping them build a shared cognitive landscape, a space where they could map out their ideas together more effectively.
And some specific phrases the AI generated really stuck, didn't they? Things like systemic experimentation, conceptual playground, relational questioning. Those sound like pretty insightful takeaways, not just random keywords.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is also the inherent tension they point out with AI. On the one hand, yeah, the outputs are often everything well written, clear, and so much faster, huge benefits there. But there's a potential downside, a challenge when that answer becomes the answer, capital T, capital A. It can lead to a kind of shallow understanding if you're not careful. Like just using the tool without really engaging with why it works or what it's doing. They use the analogy of like coloring something, saying, okay, this is interesting. A yellow would fit in here without having any idea of the psychological power of the color, just surface level use.
So what does this all mean for us then as we use these tools more and more? It really seems to underline the need to consciously work with the tool, right? To understand its methods, its biases, its strengths, rather than just grabbing the quickest result it gives us. It really reinforces that idea that maybe asking the right questions is often more valuable, more interesting than just getting handed an answer.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. From those really high consultant day rates all the way to the feeling of a place, the power of embodied experience. We've explored that messy, blurry line between personal and professional growth, and even questioned how we should best interact with tools like AI.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think our deep dive today really hammers home that valuable learning. It isn't always neat. It's not always linear or strictly professional. It often comes from that constant questioning, from experimenting, and really embracing the fact that we're often in transition, in flux.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, what really stands out to you from this deep dive? Well, maybe for you, the listener, as you think about your own learning path, your own journey, maybe consider this. What could happen if you intentionally blurred those lines sometimes between what you do for work and what you do for your own personal development? Could that unlock some unexpected insights? Could it maybe push your growth in ways you haven't even thought of yet?
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.